My ex-husband and I had a pretty incredible encounter while visiting his dad in Weymouth, England in the summer of 2010, and I'll give you a little background on us before I get into the story. We were both atheists and all-around skeptics, but also fascinated by the paranormal and people's strange experiences. At the time, we were members of a very science-based paranormal research group trying to find real answers, and he had connections with some big names within that field. This was not a ghost hunting club like you'd see on TV with people who think every creaking door or dust mote on a camera is a spirit trying to communicate. We got down to the nitty-gritty and wanted to figure out why people were seeing and experiencing these kinds of things. I guess you could have called us the killjoys of the paranormal world since we would debunk almost everything we came across. That really didn't matter though, because we believed that you believed, and we wanted to find out why. Now I'll get on to what happened. As I said, we were staying in Weymouth for the weekend, and this was on a Saturday. After dinner, the three of us sat out in his dad's huge back garden chatting over beers while listening to the stream that ran through his property. When it got late and cooled down, his dad said goodnight and went off to bed. My ex and I thought we would stay out a bit longer and enjoy the incredible view of the sky he had. Shortly after his dad had gone in, we saw what we first took to be a helicopter coming toward the house. It looked to be maybe a mile out, so not far away, and it was only a few hundred feet off the ground, so we could see it very clearly. His dad's house was also in an area with little to no light pollution, so it got very dark at night, and when this bright beacon showed up, we noticed it straight away. We watched it fly toward us for just a few seconds, then it seemed to stop dead in its tracks. After that, it darted to one side at an extremely fast pace and stopped again, then did this 2 more times, and the final one was in an upward direction. I guess they were still helicopter-like movements, but it seemed to be making them at 2 or 3 times the speed. I remember the two of us looking at each other with a little bit of disbelief. We were skeptics, but not idiots, and we knew these movements weren't normal, and maybe not even possible. That disbelief turned into outright shock when a green light that looked like a wide laser beam came out from the underside of it and went all the way down to the ground. That was followed by a second one that did the exact same thing. Then immediately after that, the main light flew backward and away from us in what had to be a very calculated path to avoid trees, and it was gone in seconds. As soon as this was over, my ex was on his feet and already getting the car keys so we could drive toward what we had just seen. Specifically, he said he wanted to find where the green lights had hit the ground, so we did just that. While we were driving and chatting about what we might see, we started calling it our own fire in the sky incident. We did this in a humorous way because he was telling me not to get out of the car if we did find something. He didn't want me to get abducted like Travis Walton did in the movie. As we got close to where we thought the lights were, I was a little on edge while sitting next to him in the passenger seat. The road we were on was one that barely had traffic on it during the daytime, so at that time of night we were most definitely alone. He had the main beams on so we could see as much as possible, and I remember looking out my side window for signs of anything at all through the dark trees. Then we came up over the crest of a small hill and ran directly into a thick patch of fog that seemed to come out of nowhere. I can't say it didn't add a little creepiness to what we were doing, but trying to stay logical, we reminded ourselves that we were on coastal roads and fog banks were not unusual at that time of the year. That was all well and good until we saw something on the edge of the road, and it had the shape of a small person or possibly a child. This all happened incredibly fast, but my ex slammed on the brakes and veered off to the right. Then whatever this was on the side of the road darted in the exact same direction and went right in front of us. There wasn't enough time to stop, swerve, or even think fast enough to do anything when this happened. I remember screaming and putting my hands on the dashboard in front of me expecting a direct impact, but by some miracle we avoided it, or it possibly avoided us. The part I will never forget though was in that split second I saw a stark white and almost featureless face pass in front of us before it was gone and the whole thing was over. Then we were sitting sideways in the road alone and breathing like we had just run a marathon. The first thing out of my mouth was, "Did you see what just went in front of the car?" He looked at me with an expression I had never seen before and described precisely what I had seen before I had ever said a word about it. We had both seen it, and it was one of the scariest moments I've ever been through. Being skeptics until the end, we actually sat there in the car trying to debunk what had just happened, but we hit a brick wall. There was simply no denying what we had seen, and there certainly wasn't a rational explanation. We drove back to his dad's after that, partly out of fear, but also because we needed time to let everything sink in. That was the end of our one and only truly unexplainable experience. Now I can move on to the big question. What did we see? Was it a real ghostly figure leaping into the road, or an alien being that had come from the object we saw in the sky? Or could it have been swirls in the fog and a bit of pareidolia? I know what we believe, but I will forever be open to other explanations and opinions. We think it was a real physical thing that we almost hit, and my ex and I have always agreed it had to be related to what we had seen at his dad's house. We saw a UFO, plain and simple, and I mean that in the sense that it was something we could not identify. It most certainly wasn't a plane, and I'm also very confident a helicopter can't move the way it did, so I'm left with a big fat question mark, and for me that's a really difficult thing to live with. Finally, I know I saw the face of whatever jumped in front of our car. I have replayed it over and over, and I couldn't be more sure about that. In my memory, it was very pale and had almost no facial features other than its eyes, and that's where I start to lean towards something alien. Even in that tiny fraction of time, I made eye contact, and what was looking back at me could not have been human. My family and I live in Mortonsville, Kentucky. We have 5 acres with a roughly 300-foot driveway between our house and the road, and what happened to me started on a Friday night while I was rolling our trash bin down that driveway. Only my wife and one other person know about this, since it's a little hard to believe and I really don't like talking about it. I can't even put it into a category because it was part sighting, part lost time, and possibly part psychosis. That Friday happened to be the first day of a 3-day weekend for me, and I had forgotten to take the trash out, so it was right around 10 o'clock at night. As I was walking back up the driveway and into our yard, I saw 3 perfectly round solid lights flying over our neighborhood, and it looked like they were pretty low, probably around the same altitude a little private plane would fly. It was out of the ordinary right off the bat because they were spread out in a line but moving together in unison. I saw the one in the lead come to a dead stop, and that made the other 2 catch up to it. Then all 3 of them were together, so it looked like a single object. Just a second later, one of them flew out of the group, then the second and third ones followed, and they spread back out into a line again and continued to go in the same direction. It's hard for me to describe how this looked, but the way they came together and spread out while moving reminded me of how a caterpillar moves, if that helps to get a visual. I've never seen anything fly like that, and I watched them do this pattern 4 times in a row until they were past where I could see them. I waited for quite a while in case anything else was going to happen, and when nothing did, I went back in the house. It really wasn't that dramatic, and I've never been the type of person who thinks every strange thing in the sky is a UFO, so I basically brushed it off and went to bed. When I got up in the morning, I had a bowl of cereal and went outside to start on a few projects. Then I came back in about an hour later, and my wife told me I had put the gallon of milk in the cupboard with the cereal. It wasn't a huge deal, but I couldn't remember doing it, and when I really thought about it, I had been feeling off that day. Later that afternoon, I ran into my neighbor at our fence. This is a guy in his 70s named Eric, who we had lived next to for almost 10 years, and I knew him really well. While we were standing there talking, I suddenly couldn't remember his name. It caught me totally off guard because I knew everything about him and we were really close for neighbors, but there were a couple of minutes during our conversation where I genuinely couldn't remember his name. It did finally come to me, and the struggle had only happened in my head, so Eric never knew anything was wrong, but it was really weird and it bothered me afterward. The rest of that night was okay, but Sunday was even worse, and straight out of bed I felt out of it and disconnected. I kept forgetting the littlest things. One example was when I had to run to Ace Hardware in town. I grabbed my keys off the hook by our back door, and when I got into my truck, the key would not go into the ignition. I swear I sat there for a full minute getting frustrated before I finally realized I was holding my wife's keys. That has never happened to me before because our keys are completely different. Mine have a Chevy key fob and 2 keys on it, that's it. My wife's are huge with her car keys and her work keys and 3 or 4 different keychains hanging from them. There is no reason I should have confused the two, and I have no idea why I spent so much time trying to start my truck with her giant bundle of keys that were obviously not mine. As the day went on, these things got more intense, and I had this gut feeling something was wrong with me. I could barely remember what I'd even done since getting out of bed, and everything around me just seemed out of place. Then when I was saying goodnight to my oldest daughter that night, the weirdest thing came out of me. I asked her if she had her pillow pet because I didn't see it on her bed. It was this yellow and black bumblebee pillow that she used to sleep with when she was little, but when I said that to her, she looked at me like I had 2 heads. She was in the 8th grade at the time and hadn't slept with the thing in years, and I knew that. There was no reason I should have even thought about it. Out of all the things I was confusing and forgetting that day, that one was the most concerning. Before my wife and I went to bed, I walked out to shut the garage door, and when I got out there, I saw that I had left the hose spread out across the front lawn. It was just one more thing I would never normally do. I have a 100-foot hose in the front, so I walked halfway across the yard and started dragging it back toward the house. While I was doing that, I happened to look up and saw something I could not believe. The same 3 lights were going across the sky. They were flying in an identical pattern in the same direction and doing that caterpillar movement like they'd done on Friday night. It was a perfect copy of my original sighting, and I stood there watching it thinking, what in God's name is going on? This was the moment that I honestly thought I was losing my mind. I looked back down at the ground for just a second and noticed that the hose wasn't there anymore. This was the same hose I had just been dragging across the lawn seconds ago, and now it was gone. I looked over at the house and saw that it was already coiled up next to the porch, and it made no sense to me. Then I noticed something else, and this scared the hell out of me. I was in the same outfit from Friday night when I had taken the trash out, and I was not wearing that when I walked out to get the hose. I remember feeling this rush of total insanity, like someone needed to drive me to the nut house. But as I was backing up across the lawn, I realized something, and it was like being pushed back into reality. I was having the same sighting in the same outfit because it was still Friday night, and I mean the one at the beginning of my 3-day weekend. Everything that had happened over Saturday and Sunday had all taken place in my mind. None of it was real, and somehow I knew that. I think a good comparison is when you have a long dream in a short amount of time, like the kind where you fall asleep for just a few minutes but have a huge long dream where all kinds of things happen. It was a lot like that, except infinitely more real. I don't know how or why, but I lived through an entire weekend during the 90 seconds I was watching those lights, and I can still remember almost all of it. I understand this seems made up, and I'm totally willing to admit that it could have been some kind of temporary psychosis, but it is exactly what I experienced. A lot happened after this as far as accepting it and trying to explain it to my wife, and that could be a whole separate story on its own. In the end, though, I came to terms with it and I was okay, and nothing even close to it has ever come up again. I want to end this by saying I have never had issues with mental health. I've always considered myself to be a pretty normal and optimistic person. I don't know what could have possibly caused me to have this imaginary weekend while I was standing in my yard, but I can only guess it had something to do with those objects I saw over our neighborhood. At least I know that really happened because I could still see them after I had snapped back into real life. Like I said in the beginning, I don't know how to categorize this, so I usually lump it in with UFO sightings and lost time, but really it was like I got additional time. I guess if there's any silver lining to the whole experience, I did technically get 2 3-day weekends in a row. It's just that one of them was in my mind for some reason. I live in Springdale, Utah, which is kind of an anomaly of a town. It's technically very small with only 600 or so permanent residents, but it's right at the west entrance of Zion National Park, so we see millions of tourists come through every year. I actually own a little shop here and rely on that tourism, so I kind of enjoy the crowds. My husband, on the other hand, likes a little more peace and quiet, and we have a house that provides that because it sits on the edge of town. There is nothing behind us but National Park. In 2023, there was a night where we were just getting ready to go to bed. My husband was back in our room while I was turning off lights, and I happened to see something out of our kitchen window. This window basically faces the foothills of Zion, but in between that and our house, there is a hill with a few power lines behind it. When I looked outside, I saw a small ball of light slowly floating up into the air from the other side of that hill, and it was actually very close to us. What had really caught my attention, though, was that underneath it there were smaller lights dropping out of it and going straight down to the ground. It looked a lot like a long strand of white Christmas lights hanging underneath that were moving toward the ground while the main light continued to rise. I called my husband into the kitchen so we were both able to see this. As it got farther up into the air, the kitchen window was blocking the view, so he went outside to try and figure out what it was. When he came back in, he told me it went as high as he could see without his glasses on, and it never came back down or went in any other directions. He also said the smaller lights that had been going down to the ground stopped while it was still somewhat low, and it started to gain altitude a lot faster after that. We couldn't even guess what it was, but we both agreed that the main light seemed pretty small. I thought it looked about the size of a truck tire, but it was a little hard to tell. Also, neither of us heard any sound from it, and even when my husband went outside, he said it was silent. The color of this light was also very unusual. It wasn't just white. It had a shimmer and a little more depth to it. Pearlescent might be the best word to use because there were hints of color. I wouldn't say we were concerned about what it was or what it might be doing. We were more curious because we'd never seen anything like it. Not long after it was gone, we went to bed and my husband was out in about a minute like he always is. It took me another 10 or 15 minutes, and right as I was on the edge of falling asleep, I saw a light come through our bedroom window. When I opened my eyes all the way, I realized the motion light on our garage had come on. It wasn't totally out of the ordinary because animals would occasionally trip the sensor, but it did wake me up. It eventually shut off after a few minutes, then came right back on again. That time I woke up my husband and told him something was outside. We both waited and watched it go off again, but after that it didn't come back on, so we didn't give it much more thought and went to sleep. This continued to happen every night for the rest of the week. Every time we were in bed, the light would come on multiple times in a row. It wasn't happening at an exact time, but it was generally between 10 and 11 o'clock. It was like there was someone out there doing it on purpose, and sometimes it would go on and off for 20 minutes straight. We looked out the windows so many times, and my husband actually went outside more than once while it was happening. He even did a lap around the garage and checked under our deck to see if an animal was setting it off, but we never saw so much as a chipmunk. We thought the light itself might be malfunctioning, but that didn't make sense since it was only happening during that small window of time. After a week of frustration, I ended up ordering a 2-pack of Ring security cameras from Amazon. We wanted to mount them on our house and garage because we couldn't stand not being able to see what was going on. Unfortunately, the late-night activity came to an end before the cameras even got to us. When they did finally show up, we installed them facing each other with one aimed at the garage and the other at our house, and we still use these cameras today. The funny thing is, in 3 years we've only ever captured ourselves on video. Birds have set them off a few times, but we haven't seen a single land animal, and they've never started recording for any other reason. We also still have the same motion light, and it's never given us a problem since. It works exactly like it was designed to. I think it is so weird that motion was being detected outside of our house within an hour of seeing that bright object fly up into the sky, and I cannot believe we never saw anything while our motion light was constantly going off that week. We even looked for footprints and animal tracks but found nothing, and none of our things were disturbed, including our garbage can. There was no sign that anything had been out there. I really do believe the motion light had something to do with what we saw, and I would love to know what was causing it. Now that we have cameras, I find myself hoping it happens again so we can solve this mystery. More than anything though, I wish we would have gotten them earlier. The one we have mounted on the house has a wide view towards Zion behind us, and it would have been so amazing to catch that first object rising into the sky on video. Who knows though, maybe we'll get lucky and it'll come back someday in the future.